Hi, welcome back to the second segment, the paint segment of lesson 1, and we're going to create a watercolor or a gouache painting of a baby fairy wrapped in a leaf, and this will let us do several things. It will let us blend a basic skin tone with watercolor. It will let us get used to handling the wet media, and it will also give us a little more practice in that 4-step drawing process with a very minimal amount of fuss. So what you'll need for this part of the lesson is your drawing pencil. You'll also need your kneaded eraser. You'll need your number 1 and number 4 round watercolor brushes, and I'm using a limited palette. It's really amazing how much you can get out of a fairly small combination of colors, and also you eliminate the likelihood that you'll end up with mud and end up with something that doesn't play nicely with another color that you're using. So for this project, I'm going to be using ultramarine blue, lemon yellow, crimson, and burnt sienna. If you have a different type of gouache, or perhaps if you're using watercolor in this course, then alizarin crimson would be a good substitute here. Ultramarine blue is universal, so that's definitely a recommendation. Lemon yellow is the same as cadmium yellow light, so that's a good substitute there. And then burnt sienna likewise is a universal color. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to focus just on the face. We're not concerned at all about any other features. This is going to be, oh, one more thing you'll need. You'll need a dark brown, or any shade of brown really, colored pencil, well sharpened to a good point. We'll be using this very briefly before we put the color down. You'll also need a palette. You'll need your watercolor paper, whatever type you've chosen to use for the course, and you'll need a couple of good-sized containers of fresh water. I recommend that you use 2, one for rinsing your brush and one for actually adding water to the color blend, so that it helps to cut down on accidentally picking up extra unwanted color that goes into your color blend. So we'll rinse in one container and then pick up water for blending from the second container, and I recommend that they be fairly large. I wouldn't use anything less than a quart jar size for each. I use a couple of old 2-quart Tupperware containers that I've lost the lids to. Those make great unbreakable water containers, but they are large, and that will help you a lot in having fresh color if your water stays fairly clean. And you'll need a rag or paper towel to wipe your brushes on. So now we'll begin. Go ahead and move this out of the way. All right, and we're going to just focus on the face. You have a number of babies to choose from, and once again, choose just based on the face because it's all you'll need for this lesson. I'm using the reference photo of the baby girl by photographer Hannah Mariah. So I'm going to look here, and I'm going to begin by just looking at what I can see of the baby's face, which is just sort of an elliptical, wide form, his wonderful large eyes and a very peaceful expression. So I'm going to go ahead, and you actually can take your pencil and move it very lightly in the air above your reference photo. This helps to employ muscle memory. Your hand is making a repetitive movement, but then when you come over and make on the paper, your hand recalls the motion that it just made. So you get off to a kind of a good start. And once again, we're starting with a very basic form. So I'm going to put just this wide form. The arch that comes up here is not symmetrical. It moves over further. The highest point is almost above the corner of the left eye. Little things like that, little small inconsistencies, little small things that create an asymmetrical place in your drawing help to give it a sense of authenticity. So this baby has wonderful wide cheeks, and once again, I'm just going for the basic form. There's not really any supporting structure involved in our project today, so I'm just starting with the form, although now I'm going to look the eyes. You can actually see her face is slightly downturned, and if you take your pencil and sort of run from corner to corner through the eyes, you see that it's an arc that goes downward and comes back up. And you also see that because the baby's head goes way up into this stocking cap, top of her head is actually up here, so the eyes from the opening are slightly above halfway. So if this is our halfway mark, slightly above that. Okay, so we have this kind of arc we can put our eyes on, or eyes just underneath. Okay, and we have this wonderful wide eyes. I'm going to keep it very simple. Eyes are closed. They're a little less than one eye apart because they're so wide. Okay, and once again, we're going to use a very simplified group of features. So we're not going to draw the nose in its entirety. We're just going to draw the bowl of the nose, the basic arc that you see at the bottom of the nose. We're not going to worry about individual nostrils at this point. This baby has very round cheeks, and so you do have, she's a wide mouth, but you do have this little edge, the little, and then the lips also travel down, slightly up, down again, and up. So there's a very, very subtle line that happens there, and if you can notice that, see it, incorporate it into your drawing, those little things add up to create a drawing that has a sense of consistency and a sense of authenticity. The chin is quite close to the bottom of her head, so I'll come back, add those wide cheeks there. You can see there's a place, a little curving line that happens just next to the chin, and then the cheeks disappear under that cap. And we're going to not draw a cap, but we're going to draw our baby, our woodland baby, is going to be wrapped in a leaf. Okay. And I'm going to continue to play with this a little until I have an outline of the head. All right, so there we have a basic outline of the baby's head. Okay, newborn babies often have almost little pads of fat underneath their eyes, and you can see that just a little bit with this baby. So we can include a little suggestion of that. It's very, very slight. All right. Okay, now we're going to wrap this baby in a leaf, and in order to do that, we're going to create a form. There's a reference baby that is wrapped in gauze. It'll give you an idea of just how tiny a baby whose legs are kind of folded up, and a baby who's swaddled, who has its arms and legs close to its body, how tiny that space can be. So we're going to remember that there's quite a bit of head. You don't want to have the top of the baby's head be just over the edge of the opening here. So we're going to look at our reference photo and see there's quite a bit of space between the top of the cap and her head, which goes right on up here. So we will let our leaf do the same thing. Okay. And then we're going to make our swaddled baby very simple and quite small. First, we'll do the basic outline of the form. Okay, now I'm going to come back and I'm going to wrap the midrib of a leaf, which is the large vein, around this baby so that I'll also make a little serrated edge, and all this does is lets us know this is a leaf of some sort. Okay, and we'll wrap it right on around and let that disappear around on the other side of the baby, so that now we have the form of a leaf that comes down. Now, in order to even make it look a little more like a wrapped leaf, we can add secondary veins. And it doesn't have to be terribly realistic. We just want to be able to see that it is in fact a leaf. Okay, so now we have that leaf sort of wrapped around the baby, and it disappears around the other side of her head. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll put another midrib here and let it sort of fade out a little bit. Just a suggestion of serration here and here. Okay, and that wraps around that way. Go ahead and include our veins. Okay, and finally, we have another leaf, wraps around from the other direction. And disappears behind this one. Okay. Go ahead and add just a bit of serration there. It's also so we have the sense that it's a leaf. Okay, now we have our basic drawing of our fairy baby wrapped in a leaf. We really don't have to deal with wings. We don't have to deal with ears on this baby. We'll just focus on playing with the watercolor and getting to know it a little bit. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our kneaded eraser, and one of the wonderful things about this tool is that in addition to using it as an ordinary eraser by gently scrubbing the graphite away from the surface of the paper, it also can be used simply to kind of tone down the volume and make your image fainter without losing the detail. And that's what we want to do. We don't want a lot of graphite showing underneath our watercolor because it will muddy, it will dissolve a little bit and make things muddy. We want this to be clear and fresh. First I'm going to clean up the edges. I'll go ahead and you don't have to remove every bit of the pencil, and in just a moment, in a few minutes, we'll be able to remove a little more. But I'm going to go ahead and get the major unneeded graphite off. And now what I want to do is I want to take my eraser and simply stick it down and lift it. And this simply makes my drawing more pale, makes it softer. It's going to let me work on top of it. I can still see the pencil strokes, but they're very light. And that's what I want for the next step. And this is very easily done on watercolor paper because the paper is so heavy. And with slight texture, the eraser sticks to it very well. You may need to work it just a bit in between. Okay. Okay, so we've lightened our pencil drawing up. It's now very light, but it can still be seen. So now we're going to switch over. The colored pencils that we're using, the Prismacolors, are waterproof. They're wax-based, and so watercolor doesn't affect them. They also are not really erasable, and so that's good and bad. It's good because we can preserve a line and remove the graphite. Bad in the sense that you have to proceed carefully because it's very difficult to remove the paper, the pencil, once you have made a mark. And I don't want to outline my picture. I don't want it to look like it's in a coloring book. But what I am going to do is I'm going to preserve just the major lines here. And by that, I'm going to go ahead with the Prismacolor, a good sharp point on it. I'm going to draw in the baby's eyes, closed eyes, very gently. Hey, you want to use reserve. You don't want to make it too dark. I'm going to very slightly texturize the eyelashes because I can see them in the reference photo, but I don't want to. You don't want to draw them. You don't want the Minnie Mouse effect. You don't want big long eyelashes, but you want just a little bit of texture close to the center. There's not a lot of lash visible out near the edges. Now, where I had the line here, I'm going to proceed very cautiously. I'm going to put so little pencil on the paper that I can barely feel it touching it, and I can barely see it. I don't really need to see it. The watercolor is going to do that work, but I'll put just a tiny bit, very tiny bit of shading, so slight that you almost are unaware of it. All right, I'm going to come on back and very lightly, I don't want to outline it all, but I do want to very lightly put down my simplified nose and primarily the line between the upper and lower lips, not too much else. You definitely don't want to draw lips. You don't want your baby to look like it has lip liner on, but we do want to put just a bit of shadow, just a soft little shadow underneath the lower lip. Very soft. All right, now we have the features very generally drawn in. That's all you need for that. I'm going to come back. I'm not drawing any of the mid-ribs or any of the anatomy of the leaves, but I am going to draw the very edge of the leaf where it wraps around the baby's face. Not heavily though, very lightly, because remember the watercolor is going to be doing most of the work here. So you really don't need much at all in the way of darkness. We just want to get a very basic sketch in place because we're about to remove all the graphite entirely. Okay, now here comes my leaf. Once again, I'm not drawing the midribs. I'm only drawing the contour, the outline of the leaf. Nothing in here will have colored pencil on it. But I do want my little serrations, the notches in the edge of the leaf that help to identify this not as a blanket, but as a leaf. Okay. And you don't want to make it too smooth. You want to put a few little lumps and bumps along the way, because it is an object in nature. It's not going to be perfect, or at least it's not going to look manufactured. Okay, there we go. Nothing in here, just the outline, and not terribly heavily drawn either. Okay, I'm going to come on up, going around the baby's head. Okay. A few more serrations, not everywhere, just here and there. Okay. All right, and the final outline of the swaddling leaf that we have. All right, now we've got our baby outline. Now that we've done this, we're pretty much immune to the eraser, so you can come back and very lightly, you don't want to lose your mid-ribs, but you can come back along the edges, take away all the graphite around the eyes, on the face. We're creating a clean place to put our paint down. And then also you want to knead your eraser every few minutes because it will pick up the waxy pencil a little bit, not enough to erase it, but enough that you'll be able to see some on your sticky eraser. Okay, just coming around the edges, picking up the extra graphite there, but not losing the shapes of our veins on the leaf. Okay. All right, now we're ready to add some color, and we're going to approach this very gently. We're going to first, it's a layering process, and we're going to first put down a layer of pale green that will be the color that we'll want to show through to make our midribs visible. And so we're going to take our larger brush, and you want to avoid the pre-mixed greens that came in your set of watercolor. There are very few pre-mixed greens that are at all similar to shades you would see in nature, and I never use a pre-mixed green. I always mix green from a blue and a yellow. A really good starting point is lemon yellow and cadmium blue. And you always want to remember when you're mixing two colors where you have such a contrast, one very, very light in value, one very, very dark, you always want to begin with a lighter color and add small amounts of the darker color to it. If you go the other way around, you could mix all day long and never get a pale green. You just end up with a gallon of green that's too dark. It's very hard to move from dark to light, very easy to move from light to dark. I'm wetting, dipping my number 4 brush into the water, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to pull a little yellow out into the middle of the well. And I don't need a great deal of this gouache. A little gouache goes a long, long way. And we want to thin it down so that it's fairly transparent. We don't want it to look like poster paint. We want it to have a nice transparent feeling. So now I've pulled this out. It's just very watery, very thin puddle of yellow. Now I'm going to use my rinsing water, rinsing off the brush, wiping it on my rag. Now I'll go back, put it in the clean water, come back, pick up a tiny amount of blue, not much at all, and blend it into the yellow. Blue is so potent. Okay. I'm going to pick up a little of my rinsing water. All right. Maybe a little of my blending water. Okay. Now I have this very nice light green. And I'm actually going to come back and I'm going to completely color in my leaf. Very pale green. This is going to be the underneath color. Leaves, as you know, a living leaf is made of tissue, much like our skin is, and it's sort of translucent. There are layers, and if you paint the leaf in layers, it actually will have a nice, realistic appearance. I'm letting my my brush move in the direction that the leaf grows. direction of the texture of the leaf. And if you discover that you need more water, you can pull just some water onto your leaf. This doesn't have to be an extremely even application. This is going to be the underneath layer for our baby's swaddling leaf. And if you work fairly quickly, gouache is a very forgiving material. The new stroke will blend very well with the stroke that you just made. Okay, so we have our big leaf colored in. Come back, pick up a little more of this green and pull it on down, just to put a continuous layer of pale green color. And if your green is not the exact shade that I have, that's fine. It doesn't have to be. It just needs to be a fairly light shade. Now I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes, and while I do that, we'll talk about mixing skin tones. We're going to look at mixing skin tones. We're going to begin with our crimson, and we're going to look at a variety of skin tones. This baby has a very rosy Caucasian skin tone. We'll be looking, as we move through our lessons, we'll be looking at a number of different skin tones. And we'll talk very briefly about a few of them. I'm putting a little crimson, a little burnt sienna. I already have some lemon yellow and some ultramarine blue laid out on the palette, so we'll be using those as well. Still using our number 4 brush, we'll pick up a little water. I'm going to pull the crimson down just a little bit. I want just the palest, thinnest, most transparent bit of this. You really don't want it very much pigment at all, just a tiny bit of it. And then I'm going to touch just a bit of the burnt sienna. And now that I've blended these together, I'm going to add even more water. So we get an extremely transparent layer. That makes a sort of a dusky pink. And that's a good starting point. That tells us we need to add even more water. Pull just the merest whisper. Okay, and that's a little pink still, so I'm going to add a bit more burnt sienna to the mix. All right, and this actually would work well as a rosy skin tone in its most transparent form, but takes very, very little paint to to create that. And I am going to use that for our baby here. Putting down just a thin layer, very thin layer, coming back with even more water. Gently moving the brush around to spread the paint. All right. And in looking at our reference photo, I can take my clues as to where I want paint. Transparent paint creates a layer so that when you have 2 layers, it actually creates a shadow, and we can look at that shadow. We can look at where we lay the paint down, and it builds a little deeper shade. I'm just looking at my reference to see where I might want to put a tiny touch of watercolor here and there. Just another little layer of our pink. I'm going to go ahead and put a layer. Now I haven't darkened the color, this is simply our original color, but every time I put another layer down it makes a little darker area. I'm going to go ahead and shade, put a little bit down on our simplified nose. Okay, we have the shadows where the corners of the lips are. We have a dark area underneath the lower lip and along the upper lip. Okay, and I'm going to thin it down even more. And just look for the places where the paint or where the color, where the shadow is the deepest on this little plump cheeked baby. Okay, and very quickly you start to build up these little areas where you have a bit of a shadow, and there's a pronounced one underneath the folded leaf. So I'll come back with a little more of our color, deepen that down a little. Okay. And under the chin. Alright, so we have the beginning of a little simple baby's face there. Now, we'll let this dry for a moment and we'll come back and talk about skin tones. And I'll provide you a PDF with these combinations as well. But we have this kind of rosy pink skin tone. In future lessons, we'll be working with fairies that may appear to be from different nationalities, appear to have the features of and skin tones of different races. And so if we were creating just a warm skin tone for a baby with African American skin tone, for example, we begin with our burnt sienna, which is a very warm brown tone, and we need to cool it down and deepen it slightly, and a very good way to do that is to add just the tiniest touch of ultramarine blue. You have to be reserved about it because it's so potent, but it does create a brown tone that is very, very nice and works well as the beginning of a darker skin tone. I don't know on the camera, this may have a purple cast, but you'll be able to see it better on the printable. What you want is a warm brown that can fade to a lighter tone where you need it to. Okay. And I think you'll be able to see that a great deal better. I'll scan this so that you have an accurate copy of it, but also we'll have a printable PDF that tells more about different combinations for skin tones. All right, so we have our baby here. Now, our leaf is dry, and you do want to wait until it's dry. We're going to use our number 4 brush, and we're going to mix a darker shade of green, picking up from our clean water. I'm going to refresh my paint, which is dried out under the hot lights. And I want to have a pretty abundant supply to add the next layer so that I can really let it flow around the leaf. And I want it to be noticeably darker than our first layer was. So, add some water. Okay. I'm pulling a good bit more of the blue over, and it's very fluid. Once again, test it on the side of the paper and see how it looks. One of the nice things about gouache is that you can lift it back off the paper very easily. It's non-staining. It doesn't penetrate the paper the way that transparent watercolor does. It doesn't have as intense a pigment, and so you may have a dark layer. You can rinse your brush, wipe it on your cloth so that the brush is dry. You can come back and drag your dry brush through the gouache, and it will actually lift it right back up off the page. It won't go back to a completely white page, but it will lift a great deal of it back off the page, and that can be really handy. I'll be using that technique a little bit as we move forward with our leaf here. Okay, I'm going to get a nice puddle going here of my darker green. This is still just the ultramarine blue and the lemon yellow. Okay, now I'm going to paint around the midrib and the secondary vein. So I'm going to let my brush flow in the direction the leaf grows, working very slowly, systematically. Follow along the shape of the leaf, but I'm not painting over the midrib or the secondary veins. I want those to stay the color of our initial layer, that pale yellow-green. Now don't panic if you accidentally do paint over it. Many things can be repaired when we pick up our colored pencil, but you do want to aim to preserve that lighter color. Okay, and here it disappears around the other side. All right, so we have one side here. It's already starting to have a sort of a leafy appearance. Come down here once again. also going to preserve just a little bit here at the edge where it overlaps. Okay. And here's our vein. It helps when you're trying to guide your brush if you hold it more vertically for these finer details. It's much easier to draw a long, thin line of paint when you have the brush in a more upright position. Our little serrations, we'll include those. And it's fine if you get different shades of green as you go. That's perfectly fine. It does not have to be uniform at all. Moving in the direction of the leaf texture. Okay, there we go. Cut it back over here. Just continue to draw downward and around. Okay. When your brush starts to drag and feel dry, go back and pick up another helping of paint. You want the paint to flow easily from the brush. You don't want to have to scrub the paper. At this stage, it should flow very freely. And if it doesn't, then you may need to use more water. If you turn your paper and pull toward your body, it also will make it physically more easy for you to apply the paint. Okay. Okay. And here we go. All right. And okay, come back and draw the space between. There we go. Okay. And this area here. Preserving the long shape of the leaf, mid-vein or mid-rib. Okay, and as long as your paint is wet, it will flow together very well as you apply it, and you'll sort of have an overall soft look. Now we're going to go back to be very careful up here because I don't want to come right up against a wet edge, and it does look like this is pretty dry. It's a little wet up here, so I'll be extra careful. Up here it's already dry. So I'm going to pick up some more green. Add it here. Okay. I'll come back. I've dried my brush. I think I'm going to pull it along here and lift a little of this. Let's see what that looks like. I think that's very nice. It makes an edge. It sort of looks like the leaf is rolled around the edge of the face. I'm just taking a dry brush and pulling it through the wet paint. Do that several times to thoroughly pick up the paint there. Okay. Okay, I'm going to come back and fill in our last section of leaf here. I'm maintaining a little bit of space. Next to the other wet edge there, I hit it just at the top, but down here there's a little extra space, so that will be good. Alrighty, come back along here. Okay. And I think I'll dry my brush. I think I'm going to drag it here again as well. Just right where the forms are narrow and they seem to be rolled up close to one another. All right then. Okay. Now we'll come back down here. And working under the lights here, it's hard for me to turn my sketchbook around, but I will. Just color these areas as best I can, reserving those ribs. Okay, one more area and we'll be done. There we go. All right. Now you probably notice we're sort of moving back and forth, mainly working on the areas that are drier, so that we allow the most recent area to dry while we add to our coloring. So now that I've got the leaf and want these green areas to dry a bit, so I'm going to come back and work just a little bit more on the face. All right. And I'm going to switch to my number 1 brush. Just as we work from the general to the specific, it can be helpful to work from a larger brush to a smaller brush when you have some detail. So we're going to take this brush, wet it a little, put just a little of our skin tone on it, and come back. I just want to create a narrow shadow right along the edge of the overhanging leaf there. Okay, and that just helps to give us just a little bit more three-dimensional quality. Likewise, back along our slightly refine the areas that we shaded before. We'll give it just a bit. Be careful not to put your hand in the green, the wet green, as I tend to do. Okay, and if I need a deeper, darker shadow and I don't want it to be any redder than what I already have, then I actually can shade with a bit of ultramarine. I don't want to add too much. I don't want to get a purple tone. And you'll develop a feel for how far you should go with a young baby whose skin is very, very soft and very smooth. It's fine to have very simple shading. You don't really need a lot. But down here, for example, if I'd like to darken that shadow, I can pick up a little ultramarine blue. Mix it with just a little of my burnt sienna. And get a much darker shade. Put just a little down and then come back with the brush and pull it down. And it creates that shadow, that deep shadow under the chin. Okay. All right, we're going to let our green continue to dry a bit. And our final step in this simple little baby wrapped in a swaddling leaf is to use our colored pencil just to add a bit of definition to it, just to bring it out just a bit. So I'll need to let it dry completely. You don't want to work on damp paper with colored pencil. It gives you just a really flat and it will not blend, it will not cover. And the beauty of colored pencil is that on top of gouache, which has a sort of a naturally velvet finish, the colored pencil really, really makes your work sing. It just absolutely looks lovely, but it will not sing at all if your paper is damp. So you want to wait till it's completely dry. So I'm going to let this baby rest here for a little bit and then come back and shade with a little colored pencil highlight, and we'll see how it goes. All right, now the lower area is still drying, but I think we can work a little on the upper area. And what I've done is I've selected a yellow, white, a dark brown, and a dark green colored pencil. Those are the four we'll be using. Let's start with the dark green. And all I'm doing is very gently, you don't want to outline anything at all. The colored pencils will not be drawing lines. They'll simply be shading, creating an area of very soft shadow. And you'll immediately see how the dried gouache and the colored pencil pair up very beautifully. Gouache has what makes gouache very different from ordinary transparent colored pencil is that gouache has an added ingredient. It has very, very fine ground kaolin or a chalk that has been added to the formula. It's extremely fine, and it makes the gouache non-reflective, so that the color becomes flat. This means that it works very well for publication because the colors are accurate when they're photographed or scanned. But it also means that gouache has a lovely surface, a little bit of a grit to to the surface that holds your colored pencil in place and does just a very, very nice job. All I'm doing is I'm taking areas where the green is darker and enhancing it just a tiny bit with the colored pencil. Very softly, I'm just stroking the paper with the pencil. This is also a good way if you have an area where your paint has abruptly changed from dark to light and you want to soften that, you can come right in and shade on top of it. You can put a bit of a shadow under the edge of any place that the leaf overhangs another leaf. It gives it a nice three-dimensional look. Here, for example, the leaf that wraps around the baby is on top of the other leaf. So we'll put a little dark shadow there. Just really refines the drawing and helps it to be clear. When you come to your midribs and veins, there is a little angle, a little V that is formed by where a vein and a midrib come together, and keep your pencil very sharp and just shade out from that so that you put a little shadow in that V. Everywhere you see a V, just on the inside of the V. You don't have to outline the vein. You don't want to do that, in fact. We're going to keep our colored pencil just as a highlight. It's not a colored pencil course. The colored pencil is simply going to be used to enhance and intensify the gouache, and also in some lessons to allow us to have a higher degree of detail if we want it. Not all of our drawings will be realistic. Some will be done in a looser style. Very, very softly shading, and it just brings out the dimensions in the midrib. All right then, jump on down here, see if this is dry. Not quite dry. In fact, I just touched a green area. That's what I get for being too impatient. So I'm going to replace that. There we go. And now I will be sure to let it dry. I will not touch it again until it gets dry. There we go. All right, we'll let that dry. So I'm going to come down here and I can work on a couple of these V's where the midrib and the smaller veins come together. I'm just going out and down from the little V shape there. Just gives those veins, makes them stand out a little bit off the surface of the paper. Helps the veins to stand up above the flesh of the leaf. A little bit of shading goes a long way. And this is our dark green pencil on top of the darker green areas. Of our leaf. Doesn't take much, just a little bit. Okay, and down here, won't go up there because I know that paint is still wet up there. But I can come here where it overlaps, shade a little bit there, and a little bit here. Okay, and we'll save that for later because we know it's wet. Okay, but you see what a lovely job it does. It really starts to make the leaf begin to to look three-dimensional. And that's really all you need. You don't need a great deal more than that. Now this is still wet, and once dry it will achieve the same shade as the green around it. So you can also come out when you have a serration such as this. You can come out and you can put a little bit of shading on the tips. And that's fine too if you'd like to do that. That's fine. Now I'm also going to take my yellow and I'm going to come back and I'm very lightly going to just put just the merest amount of yellow on the midrib and pull up the color just a little. You don't have to do this, but while we're experimenting, thought it might be fun to add a little dimension to that. Now I'm also going to take my dark brown and there we go. Add just that last little contrast above the baby's head. You can soften that if you like. By very gently buffing it with white. You don't want to get white on the dark green. It will distort the color. But on the flush tone, if you have any areas that appear to be rough or harsh, you can take a white, not too sharp, and very gently buff the area. Very, very gently. And what it will do is soften the color underneath. It won't really change it, but it will soften it just a little so that you have the gentle baby shadows, soft shadows instead of a harsh shadow. Very, very gently buffing with white, just to smooth it out a bit, soften it just a bit. So if you have a place that you want to soften, you can do that. Once this is dried completely, I will scan it and I will post it with the blog post with our current lesson. But go right ahead and get started. Choose a baby's face. A face is all you'll need to refer to from the reference. Take a look at the baby who is swaddled in gauze so that you can get a sense of how small that wrapped baby is so that you don't make your leaf too large. And then go ahead and create a baby, a fairy baby who's wrapped and swaddled in a leaf. We're not concerned with background today. We're mainly getting acquainted with our paints and with our 4-step sketching process. I hope you enjoy the lesson. Happy drawing.